So I come onto the scene at this late stage in the game to talk about one word, the one most important word in the history of man, in the entire history of man, through however many cataclysms and apocalypses. There's one word. And in fact, this word, in using it in my lifetime, has almost become sacrilegious. It has been so disfigured. And in fact, I never contemplated using it. I've been married to an indigenous man for short of 25 years. And it's forbidden in that world, very different world, to even use that word. But this is the word. The word is consciousness. And I ask you to pause for a moment and think, can I define that word? What is it? What does it mean? And I will ask all of Western civilization, and as it spreads into its globalized deprivation, to answer. And I ask anyone to join this dialogue in answering that question. How do we define consciousness? So I have some insights, and it's the culmination of the better part of 40 years of the study of my entire life has been about this inquiry. And I have covered many sciences and looked deeply into these sciences and areas of thought and disciplines to grapple with what is consciousness without using that word because it was too sacrilegious, because it is too defamed. So I start here with this video, with the beginning. And I say that, and I doubt I'll get an argument from anyone, that man and the psyche of man is in a crisis of consciousness. I think many have already phrased it as we are in a war, and the war is on our consciousness. It is a war on mankind's consciousness. So the logical next thought to explore is what happened, what caused this wound. And from there one can obviously say, well, it is a trauma. A great trauma has happened to mankind that has caused this wound, where once we begin to clarify what is consciousness, it has gone into retreat, and it has gone into recession. It has gone into a shrinking state, practically non-existent at all, as we as a species are on the brink of exterminating not just ourselves, self-annihilation as a species, but taking with us all of the amazing species in this good and beautiful world with us. We are in such a destructive bent that all life is threatened on Earth. So we go back to the wound and trauma. And really, trauma is far less complex. It's far less confusing than made to be believed. Trauma is really a very simple set of mechanisms. And once understood properly and once defined properly, trauma can be unwound. and healed. So in this conversation of consciousness, which is going to be the body of my presentations, the culmination of my life work, the word trauma and consciousness are going to become inseparable. And where better to start than with a story? It's an archetypal story, an ancient story, given to us by the ancient Greeks, not really dated. So it's in the mythological, archetypal realm. But where better to start? And surprising to many, the star is not solo. For even there, we are confused, and we think that the story of Narcissus in ancient Greek mythology is about a single player, which it's not. How can it be? No, there's a female, and her name is Echo. So this, of course, for any student of the psyche, of esoterica, of symbology, of psychology, of philosophy, should be or could be the first to admit, no, we can't just be talking about a single male figure in the psyche of man. If this indeed is an archetypal code of the result of this wound to mankind. No, it's both genders. For there are two principles in our universe, in our physical world, and in our spiritual world. Two genders that will always be male and female. Within, without, inside every individual, biological male is the inner balance of male, female, and vice versa with the female. So when we talk about the psyche of man, we cannot talk about an archetypal code and leave out a gender. So I'm going to read the story of Echo and Narcissus that I found online by a woman who has brought it to us, a Filipino, I think she's a PhD, her name is May Gil Fachinabo. And I'm going to read the story. It's a simple story. And then I'm going to read my psychological insights about it. That's not the truth. It's not any truth. It's my insights. So we'll start there. And I ask everybody to listen carefully to the story of Echo and Narcissus. It's a good place to start. So this is as it is put. Echo was a beautiful nymph, fond of the woods and hills, where she devoted herself to woodland sports. She was a favorite of Diana and attended her in the chase. But Echo had one failing. She was fond of talking, and whether in chat or argument, would have the last word. One day, Juno was seeking her husband, who, she had reason to fear, was amusing himself among the nymphs. Echo, by her talk, contrived to detain the goddess till the nymphs made their escape. When Juno discovered it, she passed sentence upon Echo in these words: "You shall forfeit the use of that tongue with which you have cheated me, except for that one purpose you are so fond of. Reply. You shall still have the last word, but no power to speak first." This nymph saw Narcissus, a beautiful youth, as he pursued the chase upon the mountains. She loved him and followed his footsteps. Oh, how she longed to address him in the softest accents and win him to converse, but it was not in her power. She waited with impatience for him to speak first, and had her answer ready. One day the youth, being separated from his companions, shouted aloud, Who's here? Echo replied, Here. Narcissus looked around, but seeing no one, called out, Come. Echo answered, Come. As no one came, Narcissus called again, Why do you shun me? Echo asked the same question. Let us join one another, said the youth. The maid answered with all her heart in the same words, and hastened to the spot, ready to throw her arms around his neck. He started back, exclaiming, Hands off! I would rather die than you should have me. Have me, she said. But it was all in vain. He left her, and she went to hide her blushes in the recesses of the woods. From that time forth she lived in caves and among mountain cliffs. Her form faded with grief, till at last all her flesh shrank away. Her bones were changed into rocks, and there was nothing left of her but her voice. With that, she is still ready to reply to anyone who calls to her, and keeps up her old habit of having the last word. Narcissus's cruelty in this case was not the only instance. He shunned all the rest of the nymphs, as he had done to poor Echo. One day a maiden, who in vain endeavored to attract him, uttered a prayer that he might sometime or other feel what it was to love and meet no one of affection. The avenging goddess heard and granted the prayer. There was a clear fountain with water like silver, to which the shepherds never drove their flocks, nor the mountain goats resorted, nor any of the beasts of the forest, neither was it defaced with fallen leaves or branches, but the grass grew fresh around it, and the rock sheltered it from the sun. Hither came one day the youth, fatigued with hunting, heated and thirsty. He stopped down to drink, and saw his own image in the water. He thought it was some beautiful water spirit living in the fountain. He stood gazing with admiration at those bright eyes, those locks curled with the locks of Bacchus or Apollo, the rounded cheeks, the ivory neck, the parted lips, and the glow of health and exercise over all. He fell in love with himself. He brought his lips near to take a kiss. He plunged his arms in to embrace the beloved object. It fled at the touch, but returned again after a moment and renewed the fascination. He could never tear himself away. He lost all thought of food or rest, while he hovered over the brink of the fountain, gazing upon his own image. He talked with the supposed spirit. Why, beautiful being, do you shun me? Surely my face is not one to repel you. The nymphs love me, and you yourself look not indifferent upon me. Yet when I stretch forth my arms, you do the same, and you smile upon me and answer my beckonings with the like. His tears fell into the water and disturbed the image. As he saw it depart, he exclaimed, Stay, I entreat you. Let me at least gaze upon you, if I may not touch you. With this, and much more of the same kind, he cherished the flame that consumed him, so that by degrees he lost his color, his vigor, and the beauty which formerly had so charmed the nymph Echo. She kept near him, however, and when he exclaimed, Alas, alas, she answered him with the same words. He pined away and died. And when his shade passed the Stygian river, it leaned over the boat to catch a look at itself in the waters. The nymphs mourned for him, especially the water nymphs, and when they smote their breasts, Echo smote hers also. They prepared a funeral pile, and would have burned the body, but it was nowhere to be found. Yet in its place a flower, purple within, and surrounded with white leaves, which bears the name and preserves the memory of Narcissus. So my interpretation, which is first psychological, is what I'm going to read now. And yet this is the most superficial level of understanding of this story. Of course, it has to be done. Here we see the archetypal blurring of distinction regarding the chase. Instincts are now blurred between human and animal, with the idea that humans are now chasing humans and functioning out of lower animal instincts toward each other, grasping for emotional survival. First, Echo is on the chase, obviously hunting of Diana's influence. Her chase then becomes, in the story, the chase for Narcissus, the emotional hunt for a human man, the implication of unbalanced emotional neediness. Echo is also motherless and fatherless, therefore a disrupted sexual role is implied with the nymph. She can never become a fully developed woman. She goes to manipulate the goddess Juno, further implying emotional and social imbalance. To amplify this, Juno is perceiving betrayal by her husband, which is sexual in nature and therefore primal, and responds with insecurity and punishment to Echo. The punishment is the ultimate disempowerment, voicelessness, which lays at the heart of narcissistic dependency disorder, and something that both Echo and Narcissus share, being the male and female aspects of each other. Narcissus is also parentless and wanders. He has no psychic center or sense of self implied by this wandering. He as well cannot ever become a fully developed man. When Echo can only repeat to him what he has said, he is angered, for his unmet early mirroring and echoing needs have not been fulfilled, so he cannot tolerate further incomplete relating. Further, Echo is in a compulsive chase for only an external quality with Narcissus, and this further triggers his primal crisis of self as she is approaching him from her own artificial and voiceless lost self. Control and power struggle now emerge, as well as obsession, as she can only dominate through having lost the last word, the issue of their story, and the hunt and chase begins, as well as with all unrequited lovers in time, and thus the crisis of romance. As well, however, this becomes the landscape of family and society in general. Echo's flesh shrinks and becomes bone, with the ages of eternal intergenerational primal shame and abandonment. This state is one of hard-heartedness, and so hard to halt and correct that the self, the society, and life itself is hardened to spontaneous life. Wind is no longer a sound of beauty, but a sound of haunting, something stuck in dimensions. Humans become disconnected with the forces of nature itself and creation. The clear fountain is silver, where no man will lead his flock to drink. Quicksilver is the metal of Mercury, the god of expression and communication, now imprisoning male and female to thwarted and impossible relating, stuck within the limits of their own wounded unconscious walls, unable to extend beyond their own psychic damaged selves. They are imprisoned in isolation from within and can no longer drink from the water of life. He becomes compulsively stuck, trying to have contact with the other, which will never be the other, but only his distorted view of the external. The external for both of them is now never real, but a projected desperation from within their own unconscious mirror, forever trapped in its own frozen image. Authentic connection with other is impossible, for once the reflection of self is distorted, It can only perceive its own distortions in others. Compulsive need only drives the cycle to continue to demand response from the mirror that will never return anything but the vacant self. The repetition becomes permanent. The illusion of falling in love with oneself prevents the unbearable truth of primal isolation and the utter humiliation of abandonment by life itself. The search for connection through the mirrors of self replaces the unmet mirror that never existed, along with the unheard echo. Life is unfulfilled and pines away. Tragedy seeps into the river, and no closure for death is possible without the full experience of life. Only a small flower symbolizes the stolen gift of life from the once great mortal male, only hinting at fragrance. Without proper external mirror, the inner mirror is a lie, and the haunting winds a voice unable to carry truth. Life is unfulfilled and pines away. Tragedy seeps into the river Styx, for no closure for death is possible without the full experience of life, and no crossing to the other world is possible. Where no physical body exists, no spirit or soul can be found to make any death passage. The shattered feminine aspects faintly haunt the river, smiting the once life-giving breasts that have no rebirth to feed. Only a small flower symbolizes the stolen gift of life from the once great mortal male, only hinting at fragrance. Without proper external mirror, the inner life is a lie, and the haunting winds of voice fade into oblivion, unable to carry truth. So with that, I stop, I pause, and I ask everyone to listen to those words very carefully. Again, my interpretation is at the most superficial level, the one I have just presented. What is to follow? In all the future presentations I'm going to share is a much deeper dive. And yet, there is such a simplicity to the answer of what is consciousness. And therefore, when we talk about this great wound to the mankind of psyche, that we can state for simplicity's sake begins from the last great cataclysm, circa 9,000 years ago. 9 to 6, we see re-emerging humanity beginning to reconstruct, but where we see the reconstruction is flawed in itself, not from a sacred consciousness. Remnants of a sacred consciousness are there to see, but are buried and hidden from the rest of us. For what reason and why? Why is the gift of life itself suddenly a secret? So, with that, I thank you for listening to the story of Echo and Narcissus, and look forward to further conversation. Thank you.